Greetings from Michigan State University, and welcome to EAB University's Spring 2017 webinar series, which is funded by the USDA Forest Service. This is Robin Usborne, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Cliff Sadof from Purdue University and Amy Stone from The Ohio State University, we welcome you to today's presentation, Chemical Control of EAB, What Works, What Doesn't Work, and Why, which is going to be presented by Dr. Cliff Sadof today. Cliff has shared his expertise with Emerald Ash Borer University several times as an entomologist with firsthand knowledge of EAB and its devastation to ash trees. He has been on the front lines of research and outreach to find ways to control EAB and help save ash trees. Before we get started today, please know that we welcome your comments and questions, so please feel free to type them in the chat feature, which you can find by mousing over the bottom or occasionally the top of your screen. We will make a note of all the questions and we'll have Cliff respond to them when his presentation is finished today. To keep these free webinars coming, we do need your feedback. After the webinar, I will be emailing a link to a short, voluntary, confidential survey that I hope you will take the time to fill out. If you're one of the first 10 people to fill out the survey, we will be sending you an EAB goodie bag. We certainly appreciate your feedback. It really does help a lot. For those of you wanting CEUs, if you would like a certificate indicating that you participated in today's live webinar, complete the survey and send an email message to Amy Stone at stone.91@osu.edu. I've put her contact information in the Q&A pod on the screen here. She will be mailing certificates to you within a week of today's program. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing soon at www.emeraldashborer.info. You will also find the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars there. We thank you for attending today, and Cliff, please unmute your microphone, share your screen with your presentation, and we'll get started.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing your screen. Okay, and I'm going to share this. Okay, all right. So now you see a slide that says chemical control for EAB, what works, what doesn't?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, we're set. So today, what I'm going to hope to do is clarify some of the recent research that's been going on about efficacy trials, as well as some of the mechanisms behind the products and why sometimes things work and why sometimes they don't. So let's see. For some reason, let's see. It should say, what happened here? Now I just see launching. I'm trying to get my script here. What happened here? I'm talking. I'm sorry. For some reason, I can't advance my slides. Oh, I did. That worked. Did you just advance the slide now? Okay.
Nope.
Is this good?
Oh, there we go. There it goes.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
Okay, chemical control is possible?
Yes, we got that.
Okay, great. All right, so one of the things, I guess, since you're all here to find out about chemical control, I'm sure you all understand that if you don't protect a tree, it dies. And then this photo we took in Indiana, in Eagle Creek, and I'll get back to it later on, is part of a long-term study that we have on trees whose average DPH is about 40 inches. That means the average diameter at breast height is 40 inches. And the one on the left is protected, and the one on the right is not. So there really is no limit to the size of the tree that you can control. So I think this will be a big focus. Now, one of the things that I want to start off with is by saying that when you are trying to control emerald ash borer with insecticides, you've got to understand that you're not doing this in a vacuum. There's a bit of a sequence to it. And the graph we have here in front of us is, whoops, what happened now? The graph we have here in front of us is how I like to represent what's going on. Okay, on the x-axis, where I'm floating across on what you see right now, is time in years, okay, since emerald ash borer has been in an area. And the x-axis is the percentage of the maximum. So if you look at the diamonds, okay, this would be the percentage of the maximum population of emerald ash borer. It might start in year one with low numbers. It grows exponentially, and then it reaches a peak. And then eventually, when there's not enough food for emerald ash borer to reproduce, the population goes down. It stays low, but it never goes to zero, and it sort of lingers for a long period of time. In contrast, these black boxes refer to the percent of ash trees that are affected by emerald ash borer. And in other presentations, I've shown this curve in terms of the percentage of ash that are dying from emerald ash borer, but in this particular curve, this is our estimation of the percentage of trees that get that have at least 30% of their canopy lost to emerald ash borer. Okay, so that accumulates over time, and it starts off slowly in the first few years, but then in year 5 it just starts to hit that exponential growth curve until you have 100% of them, 100% of your trees having at least 30% thinning, and that's the point when you have your maximum emerald ash borer population. And in the subsequent years, as the only trees that remain in the area are the trees that are treated with insecticides, the population goes way down. So this has some consequences in terms of developing a management program. One of the things that we recommend is that when emerald ash borer is found in a state, you start an ash awareness program. I call it a NAB ash awareness program, which refers to a program we have, which you probably heard about in previous webinars, called Neighbors Against Bad Bugs. And this is where people would tag ash trees to generate awareness of how many ash trees are in an area. This is really important because you're not going to amass any support for any control program until people realize that they have a big problem in their community. Then, once emerald ash borer is found in your county or within 15 miles of you, we recommend that you designate some sentinel trees that you would evaluate for the duration. And by sentinel trees, we're talking about finding about 50 trees that have lost less than 10% of their canopy, and then 50 trees that have lost between 10 and 30% of their canopy, and inspect them every single year, and then determine the percentage of these trees that lose more than 30% of their canopy. And as you accumulate more and more trees, you can actually see where you are in this decline cycle. And that's really important because, early in the decline cycle in years 1 through year 4, when very few trees are affected, it's very difficult to get people to be concerned because the trees just frankly look way too healthy to have to do anything. But once you start losing, say, 1 out of every 6 trees, have 1 out of every 6 trees have lost 30% of their canopy. That means 1 out of 6 trees are pretty much beyond the point worth saving. And in the following year, that 1 out of 6 could very likely turn out to 1 out of 3. And then that becomes very difficult to save those trees. So you really need to sort of find out where you are on this trajectory so you can mobilize the resources while you still have time to save the trees. So the purpose of the slide is that if you wait until you've lost more than 30% of their canopy, you can't use a chemical control because it's simply not going to save the tree. I mean, you can keep the green part of the tree alive, but the problem is that that tree is actually that tree may not really be worth saving. So once you can get control, and the earlier you can start implementing a control strategy, the better luck you're going to have with protecting your trees. And then after your control is initiated, we talk about this first 10 years would be an aggressive phase when the initial wave of emerald ash borer is going through. You want to keep as much in the way of pesticide on those trees as possible to keep them alive. And then after the population crashes, you would wait until you start seeing the resurgence of emerald ash borer attacking again, and then you would treat all your trees again, but at a lesser frequency. Now, a lot of the information we have is covered in emerald ash borer at emeraldashborer.info website in this bulletin that we put together called Insecticide Options for Protecting Ash Trees from Emerald Ash Borer. What I particularly like about this bulletin is that we've got information that summarizes some of the trials to date. And since this is a research-based publication, we try to be as transparent as possible for our recommendations, and it's there for you to review at your leisure. There is in December, I want to give a shout out to Mark Schauer from Iowa State. He put together a real nice bulletin on emerald ash borer management options, which goes a little bit into the economics and has a little bit more updates in terms of some of the chemical control from the last time we wrote the big bulletin. So I think it's worthy of you taking a look at, and it's available in English and in Spanish for those so inclined. So for the rest of the talk today, I'm going to start off by talking about how emerald ash borer feeds on trees and kills them, so that I can talk more intelligently about how insecticides affects each of the life stages. Then I'll review some data on field performance and some of the research we're doing now on application methods. Okay, so here, I know many of you have seen this slide before, but this is the emerald ash borer life cycle. And right now, since it is the month of February, despite the fact that it feels like April out there with our warm temperatures, most of the emerald ash borers are in the J-shaped stage beneath the bark, and they will pupate in a few weeks, and they will come out as adults in May, pretty much when the black locusts are in bloom. Then the adults will feed on leaves. They will mate. They'll feed on leaves. They'll lay eggs, and then the larvae will feed beneath the trunk, and causing the characteristic zigzag galleries. It's important to note that the adults, as you can see in this picture over here in the upper left, have to feed on the leaves. The females, especially, in order to mature their eggs, and they feed on them for several weeks. Now, they also, I have a video I wanted to share with you of the emerald ash borer laying eggs. And you can see, despite my wobbly shaking, if you look towards the abdomen, you'll see it looks like a tongue-like process is going to come out of the abdomen. And that's because she is getting ready to deposit her eggs in cracks and crevices. Now, she does this to protect herself from ants like the one we see in the picture. I think it almost looks like it ran away because it stuck her tongue out at her. But actually, so you see, she takes her ovipositor, she's jabbing it on the surface of the trunk, and she's laying a bunch of eggs inside there. So these things are hidden. They're hard to find, but she can lay upwards of quite a few eggs over the course of her lifetime. I think something in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 eggs. So it's quite a few. This picture, I guess, I took in the end of June in Fort Wayne in 2008. So if you want to get shots like this, that's probably a good time to do it. All right. So after the eggs are hatched, they will bore through the bark to the cambium and the foam, which is the emerald ash borer feeding zone. And then as the larvae get bigger and bigger, they start etching the sapwood. And it turns out that, as many of you know, emerald ash trees are what we call ring porous species, meaning there's only one ring of actively conducting sapwood, only one ring of tubes that suck the water out of the ground up into the foliage. And so if the larvae are feeding and they start etching and scratching this pipe system, this conductive system, they make it impossible for the tree to get water towards it, and it basically kills sections of the trees. So can you imagine if this wedge over here, if this part of the wedge was dead and the rest of the tree was growing around it, it might actually pull on that bark. And as you can see here in this slide, you can see how the bark actually will split. This split occurs when the other side of the tree grows and this side of the tree is dead, and it just simply pulls the bark apart as it expands, and you can see the zigzag gallery beneath the trunk. Here we see this zigzag gallery was actually found by actually peeling the bark, and the bark was not split. Now, this time of year, you're probably going to notice, if you have emerald ash borer, you'll see a lot of woodpecker holes. This is a really good sign that emerald ash borer is there. in a couple of weeks, when the leaves start coming out, you'll notice that probably the tops of the trees are thinner than the bottom of the trees. The emerald ash borer likes to start feeding on the top of the trees, and you'll start seeing more and more canopy thinning as time goes on. Then, of course, you'll see epicormic sprouting, which is sort of the last gasp. These trees here are virtually dead. They've lost more than 60 or 70% of their canopy, at least the one in the front. The one in the back has lost closer to 90% of its canopy. All right, so now, as I promised, I want to talk about how insecticides kill emerald ash borer. And so what we see here is that if you have put an insecticide in a tree and it's taken up by the leaves, the adult beetles that feed on it will be exposed, on the leaves, will be exposed to that insecticide, and they can be killed. Similarly, later in the season, after the eggs hatch and they feed on the cambium, if that material is moving up through the xylem, that ring of xylem there, and it diffuses into the cambium, then the larva will get a poison dose and be killed. And there are 4 of the more common types of insecticides that are used, and they are all used in a systemic fashion, and they attack different life stages. If you'll draw your attention to the left portion of the slide, one of the things that you have to really remember is that water is essential to the process. If you apply these, if you inject an insecticide or you pour insecticide around the base of a tree in the middle of a drought on dry soil, you're not going to get an awful lot of translocation of that product up into the leaves in periods of prolonged drought. So you want to make sure that those trees are going to be watered. So if you know what these things are called, gator bags, or some kind of use some sort of irrigation system to make sure that the water gets up, because otherwise, you could have the insecticide being put on and it won't be doing its job. So adding water is going to be really important. So imidacloprid. So the main thing I want to say is that none of these insecticides kill eggs. Okay, so they're kind of off the table. All of them kill the first instar larvae. And the second instar larvae, and then emamectin, benzoate, and azadirachtin will kill the remaining stages of the larva. And imidacloprid has to feed for a long period of time on the emerald ash borer has to feed for a long period of time on imidacloprid in order for it to be killed. Dinotefuran is much more toxic, so just a few bites will kill them. Emamectin, benzoate, it's only 1 or 2 bites. It's extremely toxic to emerald ash borer. And azadirachtin, which is an insect growth regulator that comes from the neem tree, is not toxic, but it actually reduces the fecundity of the adults. Now, each of these products have got a certain time window when they can be effective. Imidacloprid products can be applied in early spring to mid-May. These imidacloprid actually moves much more slowly than dinotefuran. Both imidacloprid and dinotefuran are neonicotinoids. So you really want to get that material out there by mid-May in Indiana, in the Indiana area. I would say that's pretty much in the upper Midwest. As you get further north, you might want to wait you could wait a little bit longer. But this year, and I've been getting an awful lot of questions already about what we're going to do about the warm weather. Well, I think that we want to let the trees tell us what's going on. I wouldn't want to put imidacloprid out into the soil until the leaves come out. So if the leaves come out 2 weeks earlier this year than they do normally, then I would put the material out 2 weeks earlier. So, we do have information. We know that the adults come out at around 450 degree days, when the black locusts are in bloom. So they're going to be responding to the warmer weather. So I would just plan to try and get my soil treatments out earlier this year than later. Imidacloprid is the one that has to get out earliest because it's fairly immobile, and it is not as mobile as dinotefuran. If you miss the mid-May deadline, and you're caught short because it's an awfully warm season, using dinoteffuran, applying to the soil or as a trunk spray, can be effective. It moves up the tree a lot faster than the imidacloprid. So that's sort of your second line of defense if you're using one of the neonicotinoids. Emamectin benzoate can be applied from bud break to mid-June, pretty much to attack the adults, to get the peak of the adults that are flying this year. But if you can get that material into the tree at any point in time in the summertime, it's going to be killing larvae, and it's going to be killing adults. It's just that the longer you wait, the more feeding is occurring beneath the trunk, and I will talk more about the implications of that later. Azadirachtin, you can apply after bud break, just like emamectin benzoate, and it kills larvae as long as they're still feeding. And so on. So there are some size restrictions on these things. Imidacloprid and dinoteffuran seem to work on smaller trees. Imidacloprid up to 20 inches, dinoteffuran up to 25 inches. Emamectin benzoate, there is no size restriction, and azadirachtin, there's no size restrictions on the label, but these would have to be applied every other year and until the peak. And I'll talk more about that later. All right, now, so that chart comes from a lot of hard research that was done by Therese Poland and Deb McCulloch, and their research groups were working together, where they did some laboratory evaluations to look at the toxicity of insecticides to adults, as well as to larvae. And these are the two papers. One came out in 2016, and the other one came out in 2011. And I'm just going to go summarize some of the results of those trials with these poison profiles. They worked with imidacloprid imicide, which was a tree injection, but I think that what we find from that can be generalized to the soil treatments. Basically, the adults will take several days to die. So what they did was they fed adults leaves on trees that were treated with imidacloprid, and it took them several days to die. The second study that just came out in 2016 was a larval assay, where they used an artificial assay that included some ash wood chips that was infused with imidacloprid, and they found that at 1 part per million of imidacloprid in terms of the dose, the LT50, or the amount of time that it took to kill half the population, was 48.5 days. So it took 48 days for these beetles for the larvae to be killed at 1 part per million. And then within 50 days exposure, the lethal concentration was 2 parts per million. So this LT50 talks about how fast it acts, 45 days, and the LC50 at 50 days tells you how much material has to be in there to to kill half the population. So we know it's toxic, and work done by Dan Herms. These are on 14 to 20 inch diameter DBH trees. Some are the first 3 treatments are actually using the single rate, the normal rate that's on the that is on the label. It's usually corresponds to 1 fluid ounce per inch of circumference for some of the homeowner products. But so I would call the 1 to 3 the single rate, and the 4 to 5 would be the double rate. And he did this work in 2006 in Toledo. Started out in 2006 when there was no canopy decline, tracked it over time, and you can see that white line pretty much shows that exponential growth of exponential death curve of the amount of trees of canopy that was being lost, and that you'll notice that the yellow and the pink lines refer to the imidacloprid that was applied in the fall at the single rate. It just doesn't seem to work. By 2010, 60% of the canopy was lost. But if you apply at the 1x rate in the spring for merit, or you apply at the double rate in the fall or the spring, you're going to get some excellent control. But you do lose up to 30% of your canopy. So this is sort of the basis that we show that we say why we know this stuff works. Now, there's some other neonicotinoids that are used in conjunction. There's some homeowner products with clothianidin, and this paper that just came out last year examines using imidacloprid drench alone or twice a year, doing it twice with imidacloprid and clothianidin. And what we find, the take-home points for this whole mess, is that products with clothianidin and imidacloprid pretty much work as well as imidacloprid. I mean, the idea was, one of the things you see in treatments 1 or 2, the amount of canopy loss over a 5-year period was 17% when it was applied at twice the recommended rate for a homeowner product. They wanted to see if they could actually bring that down by throwing in some clothianidin inside there, and actually they got somewhere between the 25 and the 30% canopy thinning range, which was about the same thing they had for just an imidacloprid drench. We are doing something similar at this point in time in Lafayette on trees which are about 6 inches in diameter. We've gone through the first 4 years of the study, and the untreated control is at about 34% canopy thinning. And imidacloprid, the single rate, is not working all that well, but we are seeing some suppression at about maybe 23%. And then we're also seeing some levels of suppression, but I think we want to wait another 2 years or so to see how this is going to play out. So there are some products with clothianidin and imidacloprid with and without fertilization. The fertilization doesn't really add much to the control, but I think that these products can work to protect at least the small trees. All right, now dinotefuran is much more toxic than imidacloprid to emerald ash borer. The adults die after eating just a few bites. So it's not over a period of days. But what's interesting is what they found is that the larvae, just like the larvae feeding on imidacloprid, they kind of avoid feeding on the insecticide-infused diet. So it takes about, this is at a lower rate, about 34 days to kill half the population. And you can see that at 50 days of feeding, the lethal dose is 0.52. This is about a quarter of what it was for imidacloprid. So the take-home point here is that both of the neonicotinoids, okay, they are directly toxic to the adults. Imidacloprid has to feed on it for longer periods of time than the dinotefuran, but the larvae generally don't like to feed on diet that's infused, and so they're feeding it on such a low rate that it takes a very long time for the larvae to be killed. So that's why even though larvae can be killed, it's only the first and second instar larvae that are really going to be affected by these systemic applications of the neonicotinoids. And the impact of these things, this is a study that Dan Herms did. It's a 5-year evaluation, and you can see that whether it's a basal trunk injection or soil injection, canopy decline is held to below 20% thinning when the untreated trees are approaching losing 60% of their canopy. So both these methods seem to work quite well. All right. Now, emamectin benzoate, this is sort of getting to be the gold standard of material that works. 2 things I want you to notice that are different between this product and the neonicotinoids. First is that it only takes 1 or 2 bites for them to be killed. Okay, this stuff is highly toxic to the emerald ash borer. The larvae in the bioassays will readily eat the impregnated diet, which means they're actually exposed to a lot more product. At 1 part per million, it only takes 23 days, as opposed to the 40 or the 35 days for the other 2 products. And then at 32 days, we now are are at 0.34 parts per million to kill half the population. So it's just a lot more toxic of a product. And we did this study. This is the study we did at Eagle Creek Park in Indianapolis. I took this picture in May of last year, and there's my 6-foot-tall graduate student on the left. You can see that these trees are quite large. This study was started in 2013. We had 10 trees that were left untreated. 10 were treated in the fall with triage with emamectin benzoate using the Tree IV system, and 10 were treated in the spring. And if you look at the inverted triangle line, the one that's on the top here, you'll see that 2014, there wasn't really much of a change, but 2015 we started seeing a big increase in mortality, and by 2016, 92% of the canopy was gone on the untreated trees. So this happened really fast. So we got into this forest pretty late in the game, but we were able to see that the spring applications held the canopy thinning down to less than 20%. So that's huge. But when we waited till the fall to treat, and the trees the beetles had a whole other summer of feeding on the cambium and the xylem, we started seeing an increase in dieback. So we have twice the amount of dieback in that occurred because we waited to the fall. We're going to continue this study for the next couple of years and see how this plays out. But the take-home point is we use 5 mils DBH on a 3-year interval, and we're getting some excellent results. We have another study going on where we used we're comparing triage versus the Rotam arbormectin product, and we used 5 mils per inch, except on trees that were larger than 20 inches, where we followed this Chicago protocol at the time, which is a gradual increase in the dose over time, and we see that there's virtually no difference. The two bottom lines are the triage and the arbormectin products. We see virtually no difference in the canopy thinning when they're treated on 3-year intervals. And this just sort of tells you what the Chicago protocol is. Basically, when between 20 and 40 inches in diameter is basically a stepped up increase in the dose, and from what we can see. But in the Eagle Creek study, we find that this 0.2 grams active ingredient per inch seems to work. So increasing the dose may not be necessary. But when the dose was increased, we found that there's really no a difference. And these trees had an average DBH of 32 inches and with a range of up to 61 inches. And there were 13 trees per treatment. Okay, so emamectin seems to work quite well. Now, azadirachtin. The studies that McCulloch and Poland and her group were doing basically found that the feeding leaves treated with azadirachtin will actually reduce the fecundity of adults, and the larvae will readily feed on the infused diet, and the insecticide infused diet is quite toxic. At 1 part per million, it takes only 12 to 15 days for the larvae to be killed. Okay, and at 24 days or 27, whether you're talking about triazine or azazole, it's only 4 parts per million is what's necessary to kill about 0.4 parts per million. So it's quite toxic, and it works pretty well. This is the equipment that Bioforest Canada uses in their application. This is it's called an EcoJect system. Basically, what you do is you fill up these canisters with product, and you pressurize it with this CO2, with this compressed air device, and then through drilling, these things are put on the base of the tree. Kind of looks like a parasitized hornworm to me, but you can see these little injection spikes that are put on there, and then the pressurized material goes up into the tubes. Now they were kind enough. Taryn was kind enough to share with me some of the data here from a city called Oakville, Ontario, And this is the data of the rate of percent of trees which were whether they're live or dead, the status of live of trees in Oakville, Ontario. If the bar is gray, that means the trees are live. If the bars are dead, it means the trees are red, that means the trees are dead. So pretty much they started these treatments in 2008, treating every other year. And the trees were looking fine until 2012 when there was a severe drought. And then that sort of coincided with the emerald ash borer starting to breakout, and you notice that on the right, the untreated trees, we started losing about 25% of the trees in 2013, down to close to 90% of the trees in 2014 and 15, and then by 2016 they're all dead. In contrast, the treated trees, they've only lost about 15% of these trees. These are with the DBH at least 15 inches by 2016. So here's some really good data. It's not quite as controlled as the study that I showed you in Eagle Creek, of the work that Dan Herms has done. But you can see that we are seeing some very good control when it's applied early. In talking with the folks at Bioforex Canada, what they recommend is that the product get put on every 2 years. If you see this, up until you start getting this outbreak phase, which I would guess once you get above 8% of your trees showing more than 30% of your canopy thinning, you'd want to double up for 2 years and then go back to the every 2 year treatments. You should be able to get some pretty good control. That is what the recommendation is. So it's not sufficient to do it every 2 years throughout. They're recommending doubling it up as soon as you start hitting that exponential growth phase. So triazine is a real possibility. So since I'm talking so much about injections, there's a right way and a wrong way to inject trees. Fortunately, there's a real nice set of best practices that just came out from the International Society of Arboriculture that you can purchase. I think it's $10 or $12, whether or not you're a member, and it talks about what you can do. How do you drill holes? How do you inject trees in a way so the material actually gets up into the product, into the leaves, and infuses the xylem of the product. And some of the take-home points is this is not an eyeball kind of a thing. This is a fairly expensive proposition. You want to measure accurately. You want to measure the DBH with a measuring tape at 4.5 feet above the ground. You want to measure your dose accurately. Okay, that's important. And then you want to make sure that you use the drill size that is recommended by the manufacturer. And you want to use an especially hardened drill, because what happens is that you can use the same drill all season, but you're going to have variable results. It turns out that if you've ever drilled a tree or even drilled wood, if you use that drill to grind a hole rather than cut a hole into the wood, that friction causes that bit to heat up. And when you heat up the bit, it can cook the tissue. So what you really want to be doing is you really want to be cutting a hole so that the tissue remains intact and functioning, so that when you pump in the insecticide, it goes into an open tube and can be sucked up into the tree. If you are letting that drill get really hot, you're essentially cauterizing the holes, and you're not going to get the kind of uptake that you're going to need. Okay, so I think that is one of the more illuminating things I've heard more recently, and I think that you should definitely, if you're going to go into injections in a big way, I strongly recommend you get that book of ISA pest practices for about $10. That could help you assure that your very expensive investment in injections are going to work. So, in terms of injection technology, there are some systems that are used with plugs, and this would be something along the lines like the Tree IV, the Quick Jet, the Quick Jet Air. Tree IV is an ArborJet product. It's pressurized with a bicycle pump. And you have a series of spaghetti tubes that go into these holes, which have a plastic plug that's put inside there with a mallet to keep the material from squirting back out when you hit the pressure. And an alternative way of doing this without having to manage with the spaghetti holes, and I tell you, after spending a good part of the summer injecting those very large trees in Indianapolis, anything to avoid getting tangled up with all that spaghetti tubing would be nice. This is a hydraulic powered system that's portable, that works quite well. Now there are plugless systems that are also involved, and you can see this metal tube. This is actually a Viper type of. The tube goes in, and it has it's narrowed towards the tip, and it allows being able to push the material inside the drilled hole, and the material does not escape. A lot of this one over here is an example of the Arborjet product called Viper, and it's got a splash guard. You notice on it, but it's pressurized. And this is what was used in Fort Wayne, and it was what's used in Chicago to treat large numbers of trees in a short period of time. And that accounts for the lower price on that one over there. Another system that Rainbow Solution is using right now is called Q-Connect. This is another plugless system that includes some spaghetti tubes, but I've used this as well, and with proper care, you don't turn it into pretzel knots, and they use a special kind of a tube that kind of makes it more difficult to get it too tangled. And then there's some newer systems that are coming out. This is put out by Brandt. It comes out from a Spanish company. It's called Entree. Basically, you just drill, you drill a hole and you stick in this plastic bit into the hole, and then put this the product in. So you see this. We're putting it into the tree like this. Putting this pressurized capsule into over the entry lip, and then by squeezing it, you release the pressure, and the material gets taken up quite quickly. It's a rather rapid way to do this. We are doing studies right now to compare uptake with a number of the different systems. So in terms of plugged versus plugless systems, plug systems, as I said before, are used in much of the published literature, and in the studies that we use to demonstrate 3-year efficacy. Plugless systems are used successfully in lots of high-volume operations like Chicago and Fort Wayne, but they've been treating at 2-year intervals. And so what we're really interested in trying to find out is to see, is there, does it matter that there may be some of the product leaking out? Is there that much leaking out? So we're going to see whether or not the plugs versus plugless systems will affect the 3-year efficacy. So more on that later in a couple of years. We just started this study this summer. Okay, now I want to talk about technology that does not work. Okay, and this is some work that was done by Dan Herms. It's called the Wedgel technology. Basically, it involves there is no drilling that's involved, and the material is there's a little. You prick a little hole into the trunk with a special tool, and then you can inject your product just beneath the bark. And here's a study where they compared Pointer, which is using this Wedgel technology, which is which was contained Imidacloprid, versus a triage that was used by a TRV versus a Zytec injection of a Zytec application around the soil. I think this is the Imidacloprid. And I think I've shown this to you before. Basically, it started in 2010. It was finished in 2012. Basically, the Pointer did not slow down the rate of canopy decline at all, whereas the Zytec drench and the triage held the damage to around 30% over that 2-year period. So here's some really good evidence to suggest it does not work. And basically, there just was not enough enough imidacloprid really to protect the ash trees. And so this was the end result. And details of the study are on page 13 to 14 of the second edition of the insecticide options that I showed you earlier on in today's talk. Now they have a new product out, the Wedgell folks. It's called Boxer Insecticide, and it includes the emamectin benzoate at 4%. That's on there. It says it delivers proven results with less chemicals or foliage spray, and there's 10 years of successful treatments and counting. I have my concerns about this. The recommended rate is 1.6 mil per inch of diameter breast height, which is far lower on a 25-inch tree, which is far lower than the 5 mils that we're using to get 3 years worth of control. I have not seen their efficacy data. I have contacted the company. They have not shared it. So I am going to withhold my recommendations on these things until I can see some data. They do talk about 10 years of successful control with these Wedgell products, but this product just came out, and this is from the EPA official document that I found on the web. It was issued in September of 2015. So there really has not been a lot of field experience, and I've not seen any place that uses successfully. So I would recommend following. I would definitely recommend that we that if you're interested in using emamectin benzoate, that we use one of the more proven technologies for delivering the product rather than something which has yet to be proven. Okay, that's the end of my formal presentation, and I'm ready to answer questions.
Well, thank you, Cliff. We do have some questions for you. Greg asked, how do you know when peak EAB occurs?
Okay, that's great. That's what I was talking about this system for non-destructively sampling your trees. All right, and so you want to sort of have a mental image in your mind. You think of it like this: as populations of emerald ash borer are building, okay, they build in this exponential phase. They build rather rapidly when you have unlimited amounts of food. Once it depletes the food supply, which is another way of saying once it's killed most of the trees, there's not a whole lot left for it to feed on, and the population starts to go down. Okay, and there are fewer. So as a rule of thumb, when you have for example, if you are in a forest and nothing's being treated, after the canopy on the emerald ash on the ash trees are all gone, and the only thing that's alive in the forest are the seedlings, I would say you're past peak. All right. If you are in a city and the rate at which the trees are removed has gone down to you're no longer removing trees, I would say you're past your peak. But that doesn't really help if you're from a managing standpoint. So I just published a paper in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. And I've given talks about this earlier in the series called Staging Your Emerald Ash Borer Infestation. And what we recommend is the procedure I talked about earlier, where you assess the proportion of trees that have lost more than 30% of their canopy. Okay, so if you can drive around and get a feel for where you are where the untreated trees are in this curve, it starts off the first year you lose 1%, the second year you lose 2%, then you go to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64 to 100. It takes 8 years to get all your trees losing more than 30% of their canopy. So you want to sort of see where you are in that curve. And once you hit 100% of your trees losing more than 30% of the canopy, I am taking a guess that you will have 2 more years of aggressive treatments, okay, until the peak, the population starts to go down. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Next.
Okay, we do have a comment from, it looks like Phil Marshall. It says, Cliff, aerial survey data from State Forest Health Survey that maps EAB mortality can help identify peak emergence and when killing wave has passed through the area.
Okay, yeah, okay, so yeah, I know. Well, Phil has shared with me some of the maps where he has a picture of the death wave, about how far it is, and that will tell you if you are in that area, you're probably past the peak of emerald ash borer populations, and I would certainly agree with it. I see that somebody says that Greg asked, Brandt recommends placing higher on the trunk than what is recommended in any ISA BMP. Any comment on this? I think you would probably want to read the fine print. In our studies, we are putting those holes exactly where we put the other holes for the other M-bend products. There's been a lot of work that shows that M-bend only goes up, it doesn't go down. So if you are going to put it a foot above the ground, you're going to have a foot of tree that's not going to be protected. I've seen these products being used in Spain, and they were being used, I think, pretty much for nutrient additives, and they were putting it higher up in the tree, and that was fine because they were just trying to get these micronutrients up into the leaves. But if you want to protect the trunk from being attacked by emerald ash borer, you want to make sure that you have a lot of that product as low on the tree as you possibly can.
Okay.
Is there a plan to update the second edition to a third edition? Not yet, but I'm lobbying heavily.
There is one question. How do you cut a hole using a drill? What is the procedure specifically?
Use a sharp bit. Use a new bit. Okay. Inside there, they talk about these drills called helical drills, which have a certain angle to the twist, to the way the knife is cut, and that actually winds up causing a sharper cut. So the folks that actually wrote this have been doing a lot of work and looking at a lot of different types of drill bits, and they're not trying to push triage or rainbow or anything along those lines. They're just trying to figure out how to cut a quick hole. I can see Bill Horan asked a question, which of the insecticides mentioned are available for homeowner use? The one is the Imidacloprid. There are many formulations that are available for that. There are some Safari, some Dinotefluran products that are used, but they're available in a granular formulation. And then there's these Bayer products, which is the Bayer Feed and the Bayer Feed and Protect. The Bayer Protect, Bayer Feed. Those are the products that have clothianidin and imidacloprid inside of it. So there are a number of these products that are available, but most of these things are relying on imidacloprid. And I think that homeowners really should be thinking about trying to protect trees that are less than 15 inches in diameter on their own. But once you get bigger than that, it starts to get a little bit dicey in terms of the control. I know there's data that shows you can protect them up to 20 inches, but as you approach 20 inches, you start getting less and less. You start reaching the maximum effectiveness of those kinds of applications. Okay. How effective is trunk applied Safari? Based on the slide that I showed you of the efficacy of the Safari treatments, half the treatments were applied. I'll see if I can see this here. I'll go back. Yeah, there, back here. Let's see. Half the treatments. Okay. So there we go. Safari treatments. So half were the basal trunk spray and half were the soil injection. So they all worked pretty well. The trick for this one is that you have to make sure that you use the correct volume of water so that you can cover the tree, you can cover the trunk, and then deliver the same amount of product you would as in a soil injection. And there are tricks on there. It's a matter of you figure out how much time it takes. I think you have a formula with a certain number of fluid ounces per inch of diameter that you would have to mix up, and that's what you would put on the area. Because if you just mix up a spray and you just spray it until it's wet, you may or may not get the right amount on it. You have to make sure that you calibrate it so that you deliver the right amount of product. Okay. Are my slides available to download? No. But in 2 or 3 days, or if not less, Robin could help me on this, you can view them on a YouTube. And you can view this whole presentation.
Correct. That is correct.
So, some of my slides, at least on the urban community, the urban forest management cycle, I guess I submitted for publication in a Forest Service technical report, and then I think there's that article that came out in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry in January of this year. Maybe we can post that on with this talk as well, if that's helpful.
All right. Do you see Kevin asked, is there an evaluation method that combines all the symptoms to fully assess canopy loss, bark splitting, McCormick shoots, etc.?
Well, yeah. That's interesting. We have done, so we had another paper that we did the year before where we were evaluating canopy and looking at woodpecks and epicormic sprouting and the like. I think that the canopy thinning is probably the most robust of all. We do have a problem when you have last year was very, very wet. So we didn't see a lot of extra canopy thinning in a lot of the trees, because really the trees had gotten so much water that they really were able to grow quite well, even with a compromised vascular system. So if we have a dry year this year, we're going to probably see a big jump in the amount of canopy thinning. Same thing that goes in 2012, where we had a historic drought in the Midwest. We saw a huge jump in canopy thinning, and then the following year when it got wet, we saw a decline in canopy thinning. Okay, so there's a little bit of variability. You might go 20% one way or the other, but I think that over time the canopy thinning is probably one of your more robust things. But I wouldn't want to be sure. I wouldn't want to use canopy thinning alone because there's lots of reasons why trees lose their leaves. I would also look to be sure that tree had emerald ash borer, and with that, so the step would be determine whether or not your tree has emerald ash borer by either looking for D-shaped holes, vertical splits, woodpecks, water sprouts, and then some combination of that. And then once you know that, then you can say that the canopy thinning is largely due to emerald ash borer, because once emerald ash borer hits a tree, that's the principal source of mortality, unless you hit it with a truck or cut it down with a chainsaw.
Okay, let's see. It says once the EAB has reached its peak, can treatments be spaced out?
Yes, that's a good question. I am fairly convinced that you can cut back on your treatments afterwards, and I think that especially if you're using the ivermectin benzoate treatments, which we know can save the green part left on the tree, we're going to say, so right now my recommendations are to wait. So after all the trees that aren't treated are dead and the population is way down, I would wait until I start seeing fresh woodpecks. And then once you see the fresh woodpecks, I would probably treat all my trees in that area. So you would have the combined effect of knocking back down that population. And then I would wait until I see fresh woodpecks again. So I have these two phases in my chart. I've got, let's see, I got, here we go. The tippy top over here. Oh, next, sorry. I'll go back. I apologize. This is a odd way of working here. Going backwards or forwards? Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. Okay. I got to hit the right spot. Okay. So I think in the second slide of my talk here, or actually this one here, yeah, I've got this, I call this a an aggressive phase, and I call it a maintenance phase. In the aggressive phase, you want to put on as much product as you possibly can to kill those bad boys. And then after the population goes down, then you want to then once you start noticing more emerald ash borer occurring with fresh woodpecks, you'd want to hit it with something like emamectin benzoate. You might do that instead of once every 3 years. You might be doing that once every 5 years. I do not know the frequency of when that's going to be. This is just conjecture on my part. This is parts we have some long-term studies where we're actually trying to look into this, but it takes time.
Okay.
All right.
I think that's it for the questions right now. So,
okay.
Thanks, Cliff. This is very informative. You kind of covered a lot of stuff here. We do have one person that is looking for the publication that addresses the effects of non-target species on treatment of for treatment of emerald ash borer on ash trees.
Right.
There is a publication on the emeraldashborer.info website that does address that.
Yeah, frequently asked questions. Yeah.
Yes. So if you want to get on there and get that publication, it'll cover the questions you're asking. So just make a note of that.
And then there's also a webinar a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that talked about impacts of these treatments on pollinators, and that was discussed as well.
Yes. So, wait, looks like we might have one more question here. Oh, sure. Oh, any formal webinars on pine bark beetle treatments? I don't think we've got one right now.
We don't have them.
No.
I know that there's a couple of other Forest Service groups that have webinars on a regular basis. So, I'm not aware of any that have been, but so no, we don't do bark beetles yet. The closest thing we do to bark beetles are the ambrosia beetles on walnuts, the walnut twig beetle, but that's it. I think that in terms of injections and the like, I know that there's some. I know that some of the triage products are also labeled for pine bark beetles as well, but I don't want to jump into that because I'm not that familiar with it yet.
Okay. So just to refresh your memories about the CEUs, I'm going to be sending to everyone who is on the webinar, I will be sending out an email with a survey that we would like you to fill out regarding today's webinar, live webinar. After you do that, I will also put in the email information on how to contact Amy Stone for your request for a certificate of participation so that you can get CEUs as you need for this webinar. So I hope that's helpful. I think other than that, we are good right now. And again, thanks, Cliff, and thanks all of you for participating. Next March 2nd is our next webinar. And John Bedford from the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development will be giving a talk on hemlock woolly adelgid in Michigan. So that's another woodland pest that we're having to deal with. So
yeah, it's it's kind of new to Michigan at this point in time, but he's going to show you what to do when the new bug comes around, when there's a lot of data from other areas, because they've been fighting it back east for quite a while. So it should be a really exciting talk.
All right, everyone. Again, thanks for coming, and everyone enjoy your lunchtime and the rest of your day. I appreciate you being here, and I'm going to end the meeting now. Thanks.
Bye-bye.